Welcome to the Family Pictures podcast, and I think we're starting to finally figure out this StreamYard version of our podcast where I got all these controls. I just do this perfect intro, and we're
Pretty
now
slick.
on. But the hard part is I never remember to open up and remember, oh, this will be episode 40, Jim Groom. Holy moly.
Oh my. How does he do it?
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, it doesn't.
I'm pretty proud of that, Michael. I just want to take a
Yeah,
moment to say that you've been a wonderful co-host, and the fact that we've done 40 episodes as we have is probably greatly your doing. So I just want to say thank you, and it's been a blast. And here's to 40 more.
Well, I mean, this is the idea. This is the message. It's like if you want to get something done, just rope someone that you like into doing it with you and make them stay committed. And that's what we've got going here. And I'm pretty happy about it too. And we're starting with.
Who you remind me of? You know who you
Who?
remind me of? There's this movie I saw years ago.
Uh-oh.
There's this guy with manic energy who takes his family and they go to another coast called the Mosquito coast.
Oh yeah, so this is me dragging you in the boat, the ship across the ocean, then into the houseboat and then the dugout. And but the funny thing is, who's our Hattie? Who's our person who just kind of keeps us grounded and laughs at our pedantic natures?
That one listener out there
who doesn't comment. They are probably laughing at us, though. You're right.
They're dropping off the spark plugs. You should go.
Yeah, let's use the gasoline to motor ourselves out of here, not to light everything on fire as we seem to always do.
Oh, wow. So good.
So yes, The Mosquito Coast, 1986, a film I had actually never watched before. You had and have a connection to, I want to hear about. It's probably a Peter Weir film who is of the Australian New Wave, our second kind of new wave-ish director, Francois Truffaut being the preeminent French New Wave director that we did with 400 Blows. And, that new wave for him culminates in The Year of Living Dangerously, which actually has a crossover to the United States with Mel Gibson as a star. And, but he's probably best known for his films like Witness, Dead Poets Society, The Truman Show as well. And this film is just lost. And in large part because it was critically not well received. This is,
It was panned.
Pretty much, universally. And supposedly there's a more modern acceptance of it. And it's not surprising. So this film was basically greenlit. It's based on a novel. I got to get his name, by Paul Theroux. And, Weir was in pre-production on this film when he was asked to become and direct Witness, which is the incredible film with Harrison Ford. And that film is a really small budget story of a city detective ingratiating himself with this, Amish family to protect a witness, the boy of this woman, and that has lost her husband, and he becomes this kind of. That's a movie we'll have to do at some point. I'd love to do Witness. Yeah. And anyway, so it's on the strength of that film that basically this film gets greenlit, and people just weren't up for Ford being kind of a monologuing, boorish kind of know-it-all, I think. And it's really, and this is where we're going to need you to unpack your literary analysis skills, Jim, because this is a bookish film. It is dense with exchanges of biblical quotations, analysis through voiceover of the son played by River Phoenix. And, I kind of wrote this down when I get this right. It's like, there's a theological framing. There's a colonialist framing. There's a post-war American exceptionalist framing. But at the core, we have here basically a family tragedy.
Yeah. And also, like, we could probably spin out of, Families on the Run and do a whole series of, tyrannical dads. And
Yeah.
this would be a perfect, this could easily be Families on the Run. It could be Tyrannical Dad. It could be like post-colonial weirdness with the fact that them going down and it's as if they were Puritans again, rediscovering America in some really problematic ways. Like, I think this film, I love this film, but this film is not without its problem. It's kind of vision of colonialism, which Paul Schrader, who wrote this, and it's interesting to think of this as a Paul Schrader film because that's
Yeah.
sometimes so clearly a Paul Schrader film, and other times it's kind of lost. But you have people like Helen Mirren, who's so amazing, who's kind of lost in this film because
Yeah.
so much about dad and so little
Right.
about mother. And there is some of that. And then you also have, the folks who live in the Mosquito Coast who essentially, Harrison Ford's character, Ali Fox, in some ways, take over, start calling savages and show them what civilization is in the form of ice. It's
Uh-huh.
deeply problematic in a
Yeah.
lot of ways. But my thinking about this film and my kind of seeing this film as a 16-year-old, probably 86, 87 when it came out on VHS, I did not see this in the theater, was River Phoenix and the great Harrison Ford, which is why I kind of rented the movie in the first place,
Right.
playing a completely different role than he has played up until now. There are times when he's running away from explosions where you're like, oh, wait, Indiana Jones, kind of. But
Yeah.
in general, this is his kind of, debut as a kind of serious actor playing a serious role. And frankly, I have problems with Harrison Ford's acting here and there and everywhere, but this is a role he absolutely nails as the
Mhm.
manic genius inventor dad who takes his son from strip mall to strip mall, and this is how we kind of begin the movie, critiquing the American experience and critiquing like the American dream and what it's become. And that scene for me as a 15 or 16-year-old of River Phoenix, or in the movie Charlie, taking this in and trying to process his dad's deep and very thoughtful, yet in some ways over the top critique of America, was so memorable for me. And it's interesting that this is coming from Peter Weir, who's an Australian, who's kind of coming into Hollywood and coming into America, working with Schrader, who is always an outsider, always has over the top shit to say about America and its violence and its insanity, and him himself escaping a religious background. So all of these elements come together in this beginning scene where you have this father and son kind of discussion about where they live and what is coming of this place. And what I loved about rewatching this scene is how many father son or mother daughter or mother son or father daughter, or however you want to say that combination, are happening right now in America as the strip malls have become a ballroom on the East Wing. Like, we have moved into completely new territory in terms of the Paul Schrader critique on the US experience. And I think this movie in some ways is evergreen as a result of just that deep critique and this idea of a family wanting to escape. And I found that for me was a real interesting experience coming back to Mosquito Coast for this, for this podcast edition of Families on the Run, because it spoke in many ways. Now, you said there are millions of themes we can discuss, and so you're the more of the literary one with your notes. And so, where do you want to go from this?
Well,
But
yeah, I mean, I think, well, let's finish that point about this, because this is the launching off point for the quote unquote, the family on the run is really, I reframed it as like an exodus, right? Because
yeah,
he frames this America that he is despising now as oppressive ultimately. And it's very much like it's part libertarianism, like a desire. He goes on diatribes that talk about people taking money, not being dependent upon themselves anymore. And he also goes on diatribes about foreign invasions
Yes.
of products. Like there's this great moment when he's in the hardware store and basically George Costanza gets upset, because it's what's his name? I can't remember his name, but it doesn't matter. And he's endlessly educating his son, and this idea of homeschooling and using education as a form of a control system is something that was going to come up here, right? And as we move through this, and he gives specifically a speech about education once they're down in Honduras, basically at a certain point. But yeah, it was something that I wouldn't have been able to latch on to in the 80s, and that's probably why I never watched this film. Is like I really would have struggled to connect with the language of this film being so dense, and I would have today, I mean, and today, even now, like, this is a film I still need to watch on subtitles, right? Like,
Yeah.
because there's a lot of dialogue, and I really enjoyed actually kind of pushing through the sparring with Spellgood and the Bible quotes and things like that. That stuff I find incredibly interesting. And, it's the beginning of this. One of the things I thought was interesting in the idea of like the reviews, just kind of put a cap on it and kind of go into this like description of why this family leaves, is all the reviews described him as a boorish character. But the funny thing is, I think that's intentional here, right?
Yeah,
Because
totally.
if he wasn't boring, if he was more grand, like a true, corner or tent preacher, a revivalist style preacher, he would have created a cult, right? He would have had thousands that would have followed him, and they would have all been forced to commit suicide in their Nikes or something like that. You know what I mean? And so instead, he only is able to build a cult around his family and to compel them and force them to follow him, and they are enthralled by him, his son especially. And that's, I think, this first scene begins that. His son, even through this narration, there's these early quotes. He talks about things like, I grew up with the belief that the world belonged to him, and that everything he said is true. So he is an idol,
Yeah.
to his son, Charlie, played by River Phoenix. And that's, I think, the important way that this starts, is the idolatry exists within the family unit. And as you said, the Helen Mirren character, who's endlessly described as mother, like she is like Mother Earth. He never calls her by her first name, Margot. And everybody is mother, even to the migrants. And we learn at the farm that they live in Massachusetts, and you get the sense they're renting a house and
Yeah.
it's part a work exchange. He's supposed to be building a cooling system for the local asparagus farmer, Mr. Polsky, played by Dick O'Neill, who is just so fucking awesome, because Dick O'Neill he's like the career I would have, like I've told you about, like I would have loved to have been a stooge who was like the punching, bag of the hero, but he gets to play, he's in MASH, he's in like Starsky, he's in everything. He's done a bazillion roles, but that's an aside.
His face is so familiar too when you
Yeah.
see him.
Oh
You're like,
yeah.
oh wait.
Yeah, exactly. You've seen him in everything. He's been in so many. Cagney and Lacey was his big role, apparently. Anyway, and he has this wonderful quote that kind of sums up his perspective of a man like Harrison Ford. It's like he's a very dangerous person because he's a know-it-all that just often enough happens to be right.
Yeah, I love that. It's a great quote.
Yeah.
And one of the things, as to your point, and you said it beautifully, as the character of Ali Fox is saying, we don't make anything anymore in this
Yeah.
country, right? Like we don't, we're all watching TV, we all go to McDonald's, we're all getting fat. Like
Mhm.
all of these critiques that, once you hear them, they've been resonating for the last 30 or 40 years. And these critiques are interesting because politically, depending upon who's wielding them, they have very different impact. But one of the senses that I got was strange. Is like, here's this highly educated, right, and exuberant person who's really passionate about their ideas, but they're also highly nationalistic. The way in which he's talking about the Japanese, like, I don't want to buy anything
Yeah.
Japanese, which is a
Uh-huh.
real thing in the 80s. We talked about it with Mr.
Yeah.
Mom and other points. Like, so I had a hard time, even as a kid and still now, like, understand, is he just like a nationalist, self-reliant, like Ralph Waldo Emerson like figure? Like, it's hard to pin him down. I like the idea that you said, maybe he's one of these kind of why am I forgetting the name of these of the this whole movement now that's huge and that believes there should be no government. It should be
Oh,
all
right. Libertarianism. Yeah.
libertarian. And I don't know why I
Yeah.
forgot that, but like
Yeah.
that, like there's all these different things, but there's a lot of Schrader in it too. I don't
Yeah.
know Paul Thoreau, so I didn't read the novel, so maybe that's
No.
all just there. But it seemed like Schrader's politics is always so weird and uncomfortable, and you don't know where he's coming from. And so that was one of the things that was hard to figure out about this figure. And for me, what made him fascinating, like, I think people miss out that he probably could have had a cult around him, but he would have basically attacked the people who followed him and been like, "You're all idiots. Why would you follow me?" Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, he's kind of this enigmatic figure. And I think Harrison Ford plays it brilliantly
Right.
over the course of this film. I mean, I have to give it to him. Like, I think this is one of his best, if not his best role. And he kills it.
Yeah, and I mean, it's interesting. I mean, just to keep going back to kind of the kind of production of this, he really was dismayed about how this film was a financial failure at this time. And almost to this day, it's the only film endeavor he's had that was a financial failure. And he was defending it 6 years later still. Like, he felt there
Yeah.
was so much to this film that just, like I said, I think it just went over people's heads, right? This is a lot to absorb, and maybe it's because of the role he was playing, and he himself says he himself described it. It's like, people didn't fully embrace the language. It's been literary rather than a cinematic exercise, and so
Yeah.
he's himself describes it that way. And so, yeah, his character is kind of, it's commenting on things like the infallibility, crisis of the man of post-war, um, American ideal families, like the nuclear family is falling apart. And so, but I have to be the man that holds this nuclear family together, right? So that's part of the, like, you could look at it, that the post-war American experience and this ideal of exceptionalism. And it's like, we're perfect. We can build anything and we'll solve everything with technology. And I would, in terms of education, it is described, he drops out of Harvard. He's intelligent, but he's a self-made educated
Totally.
man, right? He's an inventor in that kind of classical style of the myth of, Benjamin Franklin. They stick keys on kites and invent electricity, like, which is all bullshit. But the idea is, like, he sees everything is through him. It's through his ingenuity, and he is constantly lecturing everyone about how to. And that's the thing about this film. Why they call it borscht, but I think I think we should undersell how intentional that is, and how he would drive everybody crazy, and they would not really want to follow them because they'd constantly yelling, "You're doing it wrong!" That's what
exactly. He's completely a nightmare, and even his kids want him dead most of the time, right? Like, so there is a real struggle with this guy, but I think that's why his character becomes so. And I've been listening to a podcast of a couple of folks who do it like us, and the person, and I don't know if this is true, remarked that, Harrison Ford thought that this was his best role. Like, this was his favorite role that he did. And I don't know if that's true. So maybe I'd like to find evidence beyond the podcast, but I could see that, because this is really like, this is the Harrison Ford show. Like, it is all about him all the time. And he is, asked to always put on a show, over the top. And as a manic guy, I deeply relate to him. Like, I love this character because I deeply relate. And my kids, I was watching it with Tommy and Antonella, and they were like, "You're a lot like him." I'm like, save the genius. And I am like, I have a lot of that intensity that I
And
really
that desire to share.
that pedantic nature that pisses people off. So anyway, I am deeply, I guess I have a connection to
Yeah,
that
yeah.
character in that way.
And so I think maybe we can move into this idea of, this. I mean, the funny thing is, this is technically part of the On the Run series that we're in the middle of. And I think we have a couple more films, hopefully, in this series.
Yeah, good ones
Um,
too.
yeah, yeah. And this is, as I said, it's not as much of an on the run as it's an exodus. And that starts with this moment after the failure of one of his inventions with Mr. Pulaski, the farmer whom he's supposed to create um, a cooling system for his asparagus that before it goes to market and to save his crop and have it last longer. And instead he just invents a box that makes ice cubes, and it makes ice from fire. And this is this is Fat Boy. And Fat Boy becomes this monolithic presence later in the film, but it is an interesting start. It's like he leaves the community that's oppressing him because they don't understand his inventiveness, his ingenuity. And so he needs to bring his ingenuity to a community that he can control better. Because he can't control Mr. Pulaski. Mr. Pulaski's like, this thing's a piece of crap. It's not going to help me. I need a practical cooling system.
But what good is it to me now? Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And there's interesting, this idea of exodus that you talk about. And I think it's really right on. And it still is like families or cultures or whatever on the run, because that's kind of what happened with the Puritans, right? They
Mm-hmm.
kind of had to leave England, and then they went to the Netherlands, for a while. And then ultimately they got on a boat as pioneers to kind of start their new space, because no one else kind of understood. They were apocalyptic in their own way too, with people like Cotton Mather and stuff. But there is a real sense where Peter Weir or Paul Thoreau or Schrader is kind of trying to channel some of that early American kind of, this is how the people started this country. And, the figure of Allie is like, he's a point where he's a Puritan in the country of Puritans who has to leave now and find a new beginning and find a new kind of, New England, if you will. I mean, I don't think it's by chance that they're in Massachusetts and the Massachusetts Bay Colony and that whole
Oh,
idea of
right.
kind
Yeah.
of leaving to find another one. So that idea, but they are still on the run. But they're on the run, and what's driving their run is their principles, right? And their beliefs. And I think
Mm.
that's the other thing. He's a truly principled character that has beliefs about what he loves about this country. And I think one of my favorite moments is when he's sitting there and the kids are asking him, why are we running? Why are you turning your back on America? Why don't you like America? And he's like, my mother on her deathbed, when I was looking at her and watching her die, she said, give me rat poison. This is a story to the kids. And the kids are all freaked out. And he's like, I left and I never went back. Not because I didn't love her, but I couldn't watch her die. And that was that was his parable for why he was that exodus from America. And I thought, what an insane story for your kids. But I think there's a lot of people who are struggling with this idea of the dream and the belief in that city upon the hill versus maybe the reality.
Yeah. And so they leave, and the exodus takes them. They literally discard all their belongings, and they jump on a ship headed down to Honduras, and they encounter another family. They encounter the
Spellgoods.
Spellgoods, right? Reverend Spellgood, his wife and his daughter. And it's sad because the daughter is played by Martha Plimpton, and the Reverend is played by Andre Gregory. And their presence isn't, especially Martha Plimpton's, isn't felt enough, I think. But
Yeah.
I mean, at least Andre Gregory as Reverend Spellgood, he and his relationship with, they're both basically, they're mirrors. One is a zealot for technology, and we can fix society through inventiveness and stick-to-itiveness, where the classic missionary perspective is our belief in God and your subjugation to the ideals of being faithful are gonna get you through growing a society. And what's so great about it is he's not ready. Spellgood is not ready for a man that knows the Bible as well as him. And he immediately, is quoting scripture to him, and he corrects him immediately and says, like, nope, that's not right. And it's like, I think it doesn't matter the quote. And he's like, nope. And he says, oh, I was actually quoting Matthew. He's like, nope, that one wasn't right. That's not right either. And this is the description of this. It's like, he talks about the Bible as God's owner's handbook. Like, we get an owner's handbook with every machine that tells us how to use it. And the Bible is God's version of that. And then he immediately, throws this dart at Spellgood saying, but it doesn't work.
Yeah, right? It's awesome. But it doesn't work.
Yeah. And so go ahead.
No, go ahead. No, please go.
And so this is the beginning of, this is where the theological framing really starts to invade this film as well. It's like we have these really important, and they're going to come later. Later on the trip on the ship, there's to me, these two really important quotes where they trade barbs, if you will, through Bible quotes. And we have Spellgood trying to invite the family to read the Bible with this like kind of funky blue jeans Bible. Like, it's like, hey, it's got a blue jean cover with a pocket on the back.
Which shows you he's all about gimmicks, right? Like, he's not your average, minister. Yeah.
And he immediately hits him with this quote from Ecclesiastes of making many books there is no end. Much study is a weariness of the flesh. And I mean, this is like one of those, like, what the fuck is this about? And supposedly, and I need help with things like this. In your literary genius, Jim, is what I need as well. Because
overselling.
But the idea is that, and this is what's ironic about it, when you're just selling people to study, or learn, rather than find the practical usefulness of all that learning, that's the failure. And that's what he's supposedly imposing upon religious study. But it's, in fact, the sad thing is Fat Boy later on becomes the emblem of this. He builds this monolithic machine that makes massive ice cubes that has no use. And he's invested endlessly in this improvement of the society around him in this jungle that we're going to be heading towards. And it's just is equally without practical use. And then what's so interesting is also in the response, which comes from Spellgood, there are many rooms in my Father's house, but I am the door. It's classically interpreted as like, hey, you need to be in the club, the Christian club, in order to have an eternal life and things like that. But in that's also a misreading. Like, he's using it as a weapon. It's like, dude, if you don't become a Christian, you're going to go to hell. That's the classic way people read that.
And he's the door, right? So I'm the way in. And so there's that idea with Spellgood. And I read so the religious thing is super interesting to me too, because Spellgood obviously is, you could see him as the missionary, and you could see him as, in some ways, the Puritans who come and they have their faith, and that faith is that kind of establishes their whole reality. Whereas in some ways, the figure of Ali comes almost 200 years later in American history, when you have the Transcendentalists. The Transcendentalists are some of the first radicals, like Hawthorne or Melville, or, the king of them all, Ralph Waldo Emerson, who are basically like, yeah, religion's interesting, but like, it's not the only way at the mysteries of the universe. In fact, nature is a way in to understand and unlock that. Thoreau also saying these things. And so they're not necessarily unreligious, or don't believe in the spirit and the spiritual, but they don't believe the book is the only way at it. So it's interesting that, Ali would say the book doesn't work. And
Yeah.
then on top of that, he would be this person who's talking about this practical relationship with nature. And I don't know if the transcendentalists would necessarily about the practical, but this idea of communing and returning to that, because even 200 years after the Puritans came, Hawthorne, Melville, all of them were very much as the 1850s part of the culture that they become, right? And so while they can kind of, wax poetic about what was and how to do it different, they're very much embedded in it, right? Like it is part of who they are. The American identity is being formed. There's not that question. So I'm interesting how, like, I see Allie as kind of part of the transcendentalists, where I see Spellgood as part of that early missionary impulse of the two, and that struggle with the two different moments in American history that are still kind of trying to figure out, like, what is our identity, or who are we? And some of them lead to great culture, right? And I think part of what Allie is missing and his kids pick up on is like, yeah, you talk shit on Coca-Cola and burgers and all this stuff, but I still want one. Like, I still want to be part of that. And I think that's where you can kind of see that Puritan, very, there's Puritan elements too of Allie, where he's kind of cut everything off. And this is a new society and we're pioneers. And, he's kind of losing his own following, which is all he has left is his kids. And so I don't know. I find all of these characters and all of these moments, like you said, these mirrors, they're polyvalent. Like you can see Spellgood in a particular scene, and I can say, here's the Puritan, but then also at other moments, I see Allie as just as puritanical, right?
Absolutely.
And just kind of, so I don't know, like that's what I love about this movie, though.
Yeah, and there are unsurprisingly filled with contradictions,
Yeah.
If it's transcendentalism, but let's have a really, really hard geared industrialist bent added to this, right? Because it isn't a return to nature. It's a return to nature so that I can sculpt it into my utopia with my industrial ideals. And he immediately, and this is when they finally arrive, they go down to Mosquito, and they buy a town from a drunk German, and
Right.
which is just so funny.
Called Geronimo,
Geronimo,
which is a whole nother name to unpack.
I know. And when they reach Geronimo, it's a shanty town, and there's people that are just making their way in this tiny little village. But of course, what does Ali see? He sees a magnificent house in front of him. He sees this. This is where the sewage system will be. This is where we will start to have farming of both our vegetables and our crops, as well as a fish, where we'll collect fish and farm them as well. And so he immediately, the wheels are turning as how he can process this space into, some sort of built up community, a mini city practically, if you will.
Yeah. And it's interesting to see what amenities he imagines our civilization, right? Like, and that's the big, because, you see him as
Yeah.
Allie as a freedom fighter, right? Like getting away from the strip malls that have created, getting away from the pollution that has kind of ruined this great land. But yet it's also the trap of the colonial impulse, right? The trap of going somewhere and trying to civilize these spaces,
Yeah.
and where it ultimately ends. And, you could see that America over the course of hundreds of years, or you could see it here in the Mosquito Coast over what seemingly a couple of months. And I love that it becomes kind of a petri dish for, humans' impulse, right?
Mhm.
To ruin and to I don't know, what's a ruin may not be the right word. I might not have the
They
right word.
rebuild and refashion in their own image, and as you described, that's what we're having happen in the East Wing right now, and without any consensus. And we could say this about Penn Station,
Oh,
and
yeah.
that was the image of Robert Moses. It's like, well, it needs to be modern now. That is old fashioned. And and it can come down even into the home, and in the 70s impulse to cover everything with wood paneling and shag carpets. Even the bathroom, where the shag carpet instantly became filled with urine, and it became
A good
disgusting.
impulse. damn it. The wooden carpet was a great impulse.
Yeah, and so and like that shag urine and, soaked shag carpet in the bathroom, that's what kind of becomes of this beautified space in the jungle. And it's most emblematic in the building of Fat Boy. And so Fat Boy returns, but we need a more monolithic Fat Boy. And I loved your description of how, you know, in the missionary Spellgoods, he builds churches and Allie's building his monolithic machine. But you described, well, that was actually very much a part of that kind of modern 60s and 70s, back to nature form of religion. It was a modernist kind of structure, if you will.
Totally. I have one that looks exactly like Fat Boy, and I'm here in Italy. Down the block, about 200 meters down the
Wow.
block, there is a church that looks exactly like Fat Boy, like the same design. And I should take a picture and share it with you. But like, it was striking to me how much his contraption to make ice was ultimately rendered like a church.
Yeah.
And
Oh,
even
yes.
seen through the forest is the only thing that can be seen. And it's this,
Uh-huh.
monolithic, and it is church-like, just like, Spellgoods Church. So there is that mirroring that you're talking about, and you do a
Yeah.
really good job of outlining that. I think, this movie was overlooked for all of its, it was going deep. Like, it was trying to explore these characters. And I think it wins in its literariness. I think it does a really good job. It has limits and they're real. But it does a good job of creating these two characters that play off each other and create a world in which you think about these issues.
Yeah, and in this, and that the image in the background of the show
Yeah,
today is
there
what
it is.
is the monolith. And what's interesting in this actual image is you have the community kind of surrounding it and adoring it. It's being exalted in a way, right? Not unlike, it makes me think of when there's this moment in the film where they're dragging the parts up this sled, and you can barely see it in the image here, but there's like this sled that goes up a pyramid with stairs on either side. And it made me think of like literally the Egyptian pyramids and the
Yeah.
culmination of using the hill that they've built up to crown it, because the original pyramids were actually crowned with, I think, gold or silver, whatever it was, before, of course, someone decides like, ooh, that's something easy to steal at some point. And so we have this structure that everybody's surrounding and being marveled at, but no one's like, what's it for? And that's the thing that's so interesting. And Fat Boy is also importantly described by Allie as being a machine human. Ultimately, even back in Massachusetts, the prototype, its innards, the piping and the control systems, they're all digestive systems, circulatory systems, and its ammonia is its plasma, right?
Yeah.
And so he is bringing to life something. He is birthing something, and he is this father. He wants to be that literal father of invention as well.
Yeah. No, I love that, like that link with the respiratory system of
Yeah.
Fat Boy. And then, it is quite a scene in this movie as they're working to build it and as it comes together. You have those movies that cut scenes and everything comes together and they build it. Like this one, you feel the pain
Oh,
of the
yes.
struggle and the work and just how much they're putting out to start a new society, right? To start fresh. And I think this movie captures it well.
Yeah, and so Fat Boy, and this is that kind of the irony of what you, as you already described, it's like, what did he decide is valuable to a civilization that he's trying to build? When he finally awakens, Fat Boy, it's kind of like, he's Dr. Frankenstein. In Charlie's VEO, he calls himself, we realize that Allie has described himself as Dr. Frankenstein. And he they strike it up, and it's through they literally, it has like a furnace, and they light it on fire, and it starts to like creak and cough and
It's
evoke
like its stomach starts
yeah.
turning, right?
Yeah.
It
It's
has
like
gas.
it has gas, and then it vomits out, a bunch of snow and ice. And the exultation that comes out of Allie is this cool down your house, get a decent night's sleep, increase productivity.
Air
Ice
conditioning.
is ice is civilization.
I
Ice
thought,
is
what,
civilization. And it's so bizarre,
it's
like that this is this
bizarre.
emblem of society is ice. And that's the intentional, creating of this useless machine ultimately. Like, it makes me think of the classic, the modern now 20th century. You ever seen, it's one of the early maker culture projects was the useless machine. You'd make this little box and
Yeah.
you'd switch it on, and then a little thing would open up, it would come out, and a lever would switch it right back off, and it would collapse, right? And that's what the monolith is. It's the useless machine. All it is you turn it on, and it turns itself off. And in here, it's like you turn it on, and it spits out ice in the middle of the jungle.
Which is so great, because I watched this with Antonella and Tommy, as I said. And, Antonella, we have an ongoing problem here in Italy because, there's no air conditioning here by and large, particularly in the house. And as things start to heat up around the world, that gets more and more of a problem. But she was like, oh, so this great invention is simply to bring air conditioning. And like, her theory is it's because of inventions like that and all the other kind of industrial moves we have made as a culture that we're in the sense that we need air conditioning, right? And I don't know, I'm not going to speak too much on that, but I think it's funny. Like, you're actually speaking, like, she's actually critiquing the fact that the only reason you need air conditioning is because you built stupid machines like this. And I think there's a funny bit, because it's even in its small way in the movie, the way in which this movie kind of shows you the rise and fall of a culture, if you will. Kind of hits on so many of the things we're struggling with right now, like the EPA, environmental degradation,
Yeah.
industrialization, etc.
Yeah. Yeah. That I was about to say something, but what you just said even makes the connection even better, because so much of what you're saying is about stewardship, right? A previous generation's stewardship of the land, of society, through the government, through the choices that government makes, through the choices that the community makes, through the choices that industry makes, and postponing the consequences. And that's kind of the way you can look at this. And ultimately, Ali thinks of himself as this person who's improving this society in the jungle, their midi little paradise they've built. And one of the things, I mean, just to, even before we'll get to this point, this is the peak moment of the society he's built. There's ice, but prior to that, they have built up this wonderful, system of buildings, and it culminates in this Thanksgiving dinner, like this American ideal. And the alley character is wearing a bow tie, and mother is in a dress, and the kids are all dressed up. And I love this moment where he's sitting at the table and he has this knife, and it's pointing straight up, and it's a really big knife. And it made me think of the American Gothic painting and the pitchfork, because he's so, still he's still so prim and stern ultimately in his appearance. He's not smiling and effusive by any means. He's never effusive. He's never giving compliments.
No.
And so this is a culminating moment of this society he's built. And so, but he hasn't looked at what the future consequences of what he's built might be, and how, there's this really silly adventure, because he's still restless and he wants to bring ice to more people and to natives, and they make this fool's journey to bring ice to this really deeply secluded Indian tribe. And when he gets there, of course, it's melted, but he runs into these three men who he thinks are potentially prisoners. But as you're going to describe, you should talk about, like, these are people that are loosely connected to liberation movements, right? And
It's an interesting, I mean, again, while watching it this time around, one of the things that struck me is, like, I was reading about the Mosquito Coast, right? The Mosquito Coast is, bordering with Nicaragua. It has this really complex history where it had been kind of wild enough where it had kept out a lot of the colonization of the Spanish and then the British. and then various countries around it. Ultimately, Nicaragua tried to annex it, and that's still an ongoing. So the Mosquito Coast is still an ongoing contention point. But during the 80s, the Mosquito Coast is where Reagan set up a lot of the camps to ultimately invade and attack the Sandinistas, who were this kind of trying to build a new world and a new movement through revolutions. And so I was thinking, like, I don't think those three figures in the movie, I don't know if they're Sandinistas or Contras. I kind of think of them as Contras that are coming in to get the Sandinistas. That
either way, they're men with guns, and that's what's important.
And they're rebels. And it really takes this whole kind of, allegory vision of a society. And I don't know, I think Peter Weir, I got to imagine he was doing this intentionally, grounds it directly in the politics of the 80s, where America itself has long been, and this is what I tried to write my dissertation on, it never got finished, an imperial presence in South America and Central America. This has been going on since the early 19th century or even the 18th century. And so the fact that, you're seeing here all of this good, all of this kind of vision is often kind of embedded in this imperial impulse that even our friend, Ali can't escape from.
No.
And the moment at which he decides with his son to freeze those fuckers in the gigantic, Frankenstein machine.
Yeah.
This whole movie takes on an even more complex, dark turn, right?
Yeah.
Like, I believe it does. And that's where I think that this really works in terms of like not only an allegory for, families and civilizations, but even a look at the dark turn of the, Contra scandal that America, this can't do no wrong in the 80s, sending troops to Nicaragua to overthrow the government, to set up a puppet government that's not communist. And so, like, all of that kind of stuff out there kind of comes home to roost through, I think that happens because Peter Weir is an international director and has more probably of a critical eye on some of that stuff and can sneak it in. But there are other people like Alex Cox at the same time in the 80s. He did a film called Walker. And Walker was all about a kind of 19th century look at, Central America. But out of this 19th century look, you have these American helicopters coming in and landing troops and helping them take over. So, like, it was talking about the revolutions in the 19th century and also the occupations of the 20th century and trying to suggest a strong link between America's imperial presence there. And so, in some ways, Ali at that point becomes an imperialist in my mind. He goes from the inventiveness to a full-blown, not only colonial, but an imperial presence in the Mosquito Coast.
But he needs he needs to be he needs to be punished for this, right? He's no longer a steward. He's someone who's seeking to dominate the land, and this leads to these men with guns come into the community we don't know what they are, what kind of rebels they are, but they're men with guns, and men with guns are scary. And, so he feels he has to, first he invents this charade of ants have invaded the encampment and they're embedded in all the woods. And he literally starts to destroy his own house. Like, he's destroying it. And so this is the beginning of the destruction of his ambitions. It's of his own impetus. And then he finally concocts this plan, as you described. He leads them into the monolith, into Fat Boy, as a place to bed for the night. But he locks them in with help from his son. And he has his son, you can do this. You have to do this. You must do this. He's bullying him to be someone that is an accomplice in this goal, whether it's an imperious goal or simply just a goal of murder. And Charlie is really, he's torn. And there's this great quote. He says, "Don't pity those men, Charlie. Don't pity this insect." Right. And he says this as he's literally brushing an insect off of the back of his own neck, and then he finishes it. It's like, it's not his blood Like, it's not this insect's blood because the insect has sucked off of me. It's my blood, right? You have to see them as leeches, like they're leeches on our society, and that's where that kind of that early kind of compulsion to describe the failures of those that can't produce on their own and they go out and plunder and steal, when in fact he's someone who's plundered a nation in a sense, and crafted this space that is his own in his own image, without concern as to what it's going to do to that community. And so what happens is they don't just freeze inside of there. They respond and they start shooting up the joint, and then the place explodes. Fat Boy explodes in this nuclear kind of apocalyptic fashion. And not only does it reduce not only Fat Boy to ashes, and obviously Fat Boy is a a thinly layered allegory to Little Boy and Fat Man, the first two atomic weapons dropped on you know Nagasaki and Hiroshima in World War II. And then but it also leaves like a fallout. The ammonia is cast into the river, and now it is a waste.
Totally. And then the fire goes through those air conditioned
Oh
vents
yeah.
and you see the whole place just being burned to a crisp. And, that whole moment that you're talking about with the insect and it's my blood on the insect is
Yeah.
such a great moment. But it's also one of the best explosions I've seen on film. It's just an amazing explosion. Like for those who like explosions, which I'm one of them, and car chases, this is a great explosion. And his eyes go devilish red
Yeah.
intentionally. But it's after this point also that he starts referring to Hattie and many of his people who he thought of as accomplices, or as colleagues, as savages. And
Yeah.
he really makes that turn where, he becomes the full imperialist. He sees himself as superior. He kind of doesn't, really allow for other visions. And his tyrannical rule becomes that much more severe. And it had
Yeah.
always been there. It's not like he was, a loving father who was like, yay, hippie, let's create communism. He was always, my way or the highway, but it starts to really get bad now.
Yeah, and let's step back a little bit because we really haven't talked much about Hattie. Hattie is this other kind of almost counter. I describe him as like a counter father figure because
Yeah.
he's the counter to Spellgood and Allie's, compulsions to control and build. And he finds literally their sparring, so Hattie is the boatman that they hired to bring them up to Geronimo initially. And and he's both a believer and a skeptic, and that's why his character is so important. And because he's not buying into their revelatory kind of language that he hears coming out of the mouths of both Spellgood and Allie, and he literally at one point laughs at their sparring, which I really appreciated. And he basically is a character who persists in the lives of the family. He's helpful. He enjoys the success of the making of the ice, but he's not like, hey, this is gonna fix everything now in this, this jungle we all live in. The jungle's going to win in his mind. He knows it is, or the the devils that hide in the jungle are going to win. He sees this as failed missions ultimately. And he's the empathetic character. And as the failure of Geronimo is complete, they're forced back downriver. And even Hattie has lost his boat, but he does, as a good steward, actually brings them back down to the sea. And when they reach the sea, the family is rejoicing, right? They feel like we're going to leave. We're going to be able to go to Cape Cod. We can go home.
God, exactly. Again, that
Because
Massachusetts.
yeah. And so Hattie is this person who he's independent minded, and that's important. It's like, whereas basically all the other indigenous peoples of the Mosquito Coast are presented as people that are just simply followers, Hattie is importantly standing out, and not as someone who's righteous, just someone who's caring.
Yeah. Yeah, and he's a great character. He also gets the watch. So as they go back to so if we surmise, and you did it beautifully, Geronimo's destroyed. They're at the beach, and they're all ready to go home. And Allie's like, no, no, no. All we need is right here on this beach. And he starts his Robin Caruso stage of this movie where they're building out. And, Hattie, at that point, it's another interesting thing where, Allie's a sense of, I don't know if it's arrogance. I don't know if it's that switch in him, even though Hattie knows the land and he knows the space and is saying like, you can't build here. And, a couple of months time, this is all going to be underwater and everybody will be, this is the
You're going to
sea.
drown.
You're going to drown. And he won't listen to him. He's like some savage telling me my life. And like, that's the point at which Allie becomes a despicable character and you don't really have any respect for him anymore. And the children at this point and the wife are just tolerating him. But he can't get over his own failure with Geronimo and won't listen to anyone. And he's kind of a lost cause at that point.
Yeah. And, and importantly, Helen Mirren's character is Margot, for the first time in the entire film, calls him out on bullshit. When Allie calls Hattie a savage, she said, don't call him that. Like, he's meant so much to us. He is the point of stability in this family and has been actually from the beginning. He's been helping us navigate this whole system, because that's another thing is Allie constantly says, I'm doing this myself. I am the salvation. And at this point, he's literally telling, Mother, I am still the salvation. I will have the solution. And in the meantime, he's ignoring all the support, whether it's the village that helped him build his, monolith in the house that they lived in, or it's the support when Hattie comes back with supplies on multiple occasions. And there's this wonderful moment earlier in the film where he comes back with this bolt of yellow cloth and, it immediately is used to build a little jumpsuit for one of the twin girls. And there's a man who's watching her build it and sew this outfit together, and he's like, that's a nice yellow. And of course she gives it to him, and then suddenly everybody in the village
wearing it.
It's that's one of the rare charming moments of the film, because it is about community. It's like, of course, this is wonderful. And Hattie is kind of the symbol of that actual communal perspective. But it is also the beginning of the end, as you say, because sure enough, the storms do come, the typhoon or whatever it is, the monsoon season starts, and Hattie comes at the start of it. And he, in the middle of the night, approaches Charlie, because Charlie, he knows, is starting to see, as you've described, this is all is doomed to fail at this point. And he gives him spark and gasoline, and spark are literal spark plugs, because they have, Allie, in his typical ingenuity, has found an outboard mower and he's repaired it, but it has no spark plugs and it has no gasoline. And Hattie shows up and gives them to the middle of the night, and he says, lie to your father, say that you found them. And Allie readily takes this from his son and accepts that he's found them. And they survive, they live in large part due to Hattie's generosity and willingness to still care for the family after being rejected. And this leads to kind of the beginning of the end, where they make yet another trip upstream. And man, is this a bizarre kind of moment when they're coming upstream and there's suddenly this music. And at first you're not, is this soundtrack or is this what they're actually hearing? And the people in the boat literally hear it the same way that I'm describing it. They're like, what is this? Is this in my head, or am I actually hearing this hymn that's being sung like it's from angels? And they've discovered Spellgood's encampment.
Yeah. Which I think Allie refers to it as, see, they need barbed wire. It's like a concentration camp to keep them in.
Christian concentration camp, yes.
And it's interesting because they get there now and, they're in bad shape. He's kind of laughingly saying, don't drink all the coconut milk. We don't know when we'll get food again. And he's proud of that. And like everyone on the ship is just, is a mess and is tired. And the ship itself was their home on the beach, but he and his ingenuity built it so that should, anything happen, the ship will go out to sea. It lost a lot of its effect. So what you essentially have is like a platform with these sticks coming over it that looks like, the rotted out, carcass of a whale. And I
Yeah.
really
Oh,
love
yeah. Oh,
that.
that's interesting. Yeah.
I really love that scene when they're coming in and all that's
Uh-huh.
happening. But one of the things we haven't mentioned yet that's worth talking about is, in order to keep them there, Allie lies to his
Oh,
family
right. That's
and
right.
tells them that there was a nuclear holocaust in America and there's nothing to go back to,
Yeah.
which is very 80s in its own way. And as a kid of the
Yeah.
80s, you could believe that maybe.
Right.
But like it's also a horrific, like it's really he keeps outdoing himself with like, terrible kind of moment after moment in terms of like, not the stand-up guy we saw with his son at the beginning, critiquing the American dream and everything it's become. But like, he's really fallen from grace, and then he gets to Spellgood's um uh camp out or
And
whatever. And
yeah,
what does he do?
yeah, it's his mission. They come into the mission, and one of the things that's so interesting about that moment is like, so we hear Spellgood preaching, to the community, and it's this sermon he's giving. Um, wait, I have to get some of the quotes from it, where they're going, and he's talking about spiting enemies, the story of Gideon, blah, blah, blah. And as we turn the corner, because they're approaching his church to walk in, it's a televised recording of Spellgood that the community is watching. And it's
Yeah.
so discordant because this is the first kind of electronic communication in the entire film, mind you, never mind when they were back in Massachusetts. And so Spellgood has now become just an avatar for us in this moment, and his control over his community is now being exported to the electronic culture. It's no longer, you don't need in person to control your community. You can control them with consumer society's best invention, which is the television.
Yeah.
And it's he continues this, and my favorite part is when it's like, and he's talking about the idea of how you can connect with God through prayer, but he's like, it's like making a simple telephone call. And what do you do with the line? If the line is cut, you don't get a reply, just ring again. It's like you're trying to get, on tech support, and tech support is brutal and no one answers, and you're in these queues forever. It's like making this analogy between, your connection with, your spiritual connection is one that is like not unlike tech support with some company that's failed you.
And also with a group of people who probably really don't have any real familiarity with the phone.
No.
So like it's also the analogy is completely probably lost for most of them. And they're sitting there, and I think Ali says this, and it looks like they're pretty much brainwashed. They're just watching bad TV. Right.
Yeah.
And it's the bad TV is what you realize is just what a huckster of a preacher Spellgood is. And that kind of comes clear with this one. It was kind of clear with the Blue Jean Bible, to be fair. And I think it's kind of brought home here.
Yeah, and this is along with the nuclear holocaust comments. It's his final desperate attempt to keep them together. He needs to take down. He can no longer build, so he has to take down this, Spellgood's success of control, because he's done it through poisonous means. It is not the righteous technological means of, I'm the steward here. I'm the captain, right? I am the captain, right? Not you. And so what happens? There's two moments happening at the same time. Both Charlie and Jerry have gone off to, figure out what to do, and they run into Emily. And this is only, Martha Plimpton's second and only appearance in the film. And she spells out, it's like, there's no nuclear disaster. And then my favorite quote is like, I thought my dad was weird,
Yeah.
And so she's telling them, it's like, yeah, we're all screwed here. You should get out. And, the boys run back to the houseboat, and Allie's gone. And meanwhile, Allie's lighting the church on fire. He's trying to burn the place down. And in this machinations, we're going to leave you. And Allie turns on them and says, you never believed in me. And meanwhile, Spellgood just shoots him.
Yeah.
And then this is the final resignation of it's over, and they don't escape in the van as Emily had promised they could use. They just float back to the sea. And it ends simply with Allie just kind of whispering more lectures about how the world works. And it really is kind of the ultimate kind of way to frame this film in my mind is it's Allie's homeschool on steroids. You know, it's this idea that you can control everything with a perfect lecture. And this is a failure to this day that's interesting. You think about, you know, the democratic perspective of how to fix society is just another lecture. If I could just tell them how things should be done, never mind what their existence is. If I could just tell them what is the right way to do things, they'll hear me and we'll fix society. And that's one of the indictments, I think, of all those that kind of political mechanistic nature of to teach and control through, here's yet another way I can showcase this is the way to fix things. And not that it's not important to try to craft solutions to problems. I'm not saying that, but to know that your solution doesn't have flaws and that you can force this solution down someone's throat and not recognize that they're human people, and they need to awaken to their own ideas of, I agree, you can't just compel them and place it in their brains and they'll agree, or force them down the river. You know, it's like force them to go up river with you. And that's this weird metaphor at the very end. Downriver is this retreat, but it's also this place of safety at the very end.
Well, it's also too, like, one of the things I'm fascinated by with this is, you know, I like your idea about lectures and what that kind of maybe means in your homeschooling critique, which is great. But also in the 80s, right, we have the teleprompter president. You know, we have the first president who was a famous actor who comes on and who tells us stories. And one of the stories he tells us is that American democracy is the city upon the hill that the whole world is looking to, kind of putting him in the situation as the monolith is us, right? But I'm also deeply fascinated that in November of 1986, one of the films, and this is from Wikipedia, that was shown and watched by Reagan was this at Camp David. So I just wonder what it must have been like, you know, what Reagan was thinking as he has to make this connection between what's happening in this part of the world and, you know, all of this. And like this vision that he also talks about extensively in his speeches is about, you know, returning to that beginning, to that Puritan vision of we are a unique pioneering people, right? Who, you know, through our goodwill and through our strength will beat communism. And we will be that, you know, that shining light for the rest of the democratic world, right? There's so much happening for me in this movie as a result of that, pointing to your idea of this lecturing around democracy behind what the people actually lecturing are really doing. They're ruining us, you know, they're killing that whole vision. And so there's, you know, this was a fun movie to rewatch, I have to say.
Yeah. You know, no more lectures, Jim. No more lectures, audience. This is the end of the Family Pictures podcast. We're here to just supposedly entertain you, not enlighten you. This is just fun stuff, fun facts.
Are you talking over the outro music?